Hi there, thank you very much for taking the time to watch my presentation online. Today I'm presenting from the unceded homelands of the Lower Tanana, and I acknowledge this not only because I'm grateful to Alaska's First Peoples who have been in deep connection with their land and water for generations, but also in recognition of the historical and ongoing legacy of colonialism. And I am committed to improve equity in my life and science institutions I work with. So I'm going to present the key results of a recent Nature Communications Earth and Environment publication. In this paper, we show that natural climate variability can trigger ocean acidification extreme events in the Gulf of Alaska. And I would also like to acknowledge my co-authors at this point, especially Rémi Paget and Scott Downey and Andrew McDonald, who have contributed a lot to this work. The gradual press of ocean acidification on the ecosystem is a global problem and also of great concern in the Gulf of Alaska. It decreases pH and aragonite saturation state and increases the carbon dioxide levels in seawater. These chemical changes have negative effects on important Alaskan organisms such as coho salmon, theropods, and some crabs and mussels. While ocean acidification is a slow decadal process that happens across the globe, it manifests itself differently depending on the local physical, chemical, and biological nuances. Because waters of the Gulf of Alaska are rather cold, carbon dioxide is more soluble here than in temperate waters, resulting in naturally lower carbonate ion concentrations, which puts the ecosystem closer to potentially harmful thresholds. Freshwater discharge from tidewater glaciers, streams, and precipitation decrease carbonate ion concentrations during summer, and then also biological production that increases the carbonate ion concentration during phytoplankton blooms can, of course, change the inorganic carbon chemistry. And then again, circulations such as coastal downwelling and offshore upwelling additionally affect the inorganic carbon system in opposite ways. For this study, we used a regional biogeochemical model to better understand how the uptake of anthropogenic carbon dioxide and natural variability of the system interact to create unfavorable conditions for sensitive marine organisms of the Gulf of Alaska, and in this case, for theropods. The model we use is a high-resolution regional model of the Gulf of Alaska to reconstruct and simulate the processes that are changing the ocean chemistry from 1980 through 2013. The model incorporates historic data that we have available, such as historic wind, precipitation, air temperature, and atmospheric and oceanic CO2 concentrations, and also modeled riverine input. Using these inputs, the model simulates ocean circulation, temperature, salinity, and biological and inorganic carbon processes. We thoroughly evaluated the model with observations from the Seward Line and the P16 cruises and also recent mooring data. And this plot shows dissolved inorganic carbon profiles from a P16 cruise as red dots compared to our model results in blue. The model is particularly skilled in reproducing dissolved inorganic carbon profiles offshore, but overestimates dissolved inorganic carbon at the surface in nearshore areas with this data set. But if you're interested in a more in-depth evaluation, please have a look at our recent publications in Biogeosciences and Communications, Earth and Environment. So after thoroughly evaluating the model, we use it to study processes that lead to the regional manifestation of ocean acidification extreme events and how it might affect the ecosystem. And this graph here shows a time series of pH at 100 meters depth in the central subpolar gyre. Besides the fast rate of pH change, it shows that this area experiences low pH extreme events that happen on subdecadal to decadal timescales. And these fluctuations in pH and other carbonate chemistry variables exacerbate the seasonal periods of stress from ocean acidification, leading to these extreme events as illustrated in this time series. To understand the underlying processes of these extreme events, we used empirical orthogonal functions, or EOFs. EOFs helped us to find the leading mode of variability in the Gulf of Alaska. And here you're looking at the leading modes of satellite sea surface height, modeled sea surface height, and modeled aragonite saturation state. And we found that the strongest spatial anomaly signal of satellite and modeled sea surface height and also aragonite saturation state is in the central subpolar gyre, shown with these dark colors. The temporal pattern of the leading mode of variability of sea surface height correlates well with the first principal component of the satellite observed sea surface height, and this suggests that the model is able to translate large-scale atmospheric forcing into corresponding fluctuations of sea surface height. And the first principal component of the sea surface height also correlates well with the first principal component of the aragonite saturation state at the surface, and even better at 100 meters. So what does this all mean? Well, stronger wind stress curl intensifies the circulation of the subpolar gyre, which leads to lower sea surface height and stronger upwelling of carbon and nutrient-rich waters, as shown here in this figure. And the natural variability on top of the long-term press of ocean acidification quickly decreases the volume of the water column that is still suitable for healthy theropods. Here you're looking at the volume of the upper 50 meters in the upper plot, and in the lower plot shows the water column from 50 to 200 meters in the subpolar gyre. And in the upper plot, it shows that in the 1980s, the upper 50 meters served as a healthy habitat for theropods. So the aragonite saturation state was still over their threshold of 1.3. However, in more recent years, extreme events turned the upper 50 meters into an unfavorable area for sea snails, with aragonite saturation states lower 1.3. And then in a lower plot, you can basically see that it has always been kind of unfavorable, but recently the entire water column is unfavorable for theropods. So these extreme events are driven by natural climate variability on top of the press of ocean acidification, and this is basically the take-home message of this talk. So during multiple years in a row, the gyre speeds up due to increased winds, which brings up more carbon dioxide from the deep waters to the upper water column, creating these extreme ocean acidification events and conditions that are not healthy for theropods. And interestingly, during a cruise in 2015, Nina Bednarsek and her team sampled theropods from the central subpolar gyre, and these samples or these individuals show more severe dissolution in the subpolar gyre than in other parts of the Gulf of Alaska. And while we're missing direct evidence, it is possible that the low levels of carbonate ions in the central subpolar gyre, and maybe in concert with high temperatures during the heat wave at that time, have led to the severe dissolution of theropods. So the strong gyre can also bring up water with low oxygen content to the surface, leading to low oxygen and acidification compound events, as we were showing here. And this is work that Rémi Paget, my postdoc, has done recently, and we're working on a publication as well. So this plot shows the oxygen concentration in color across the water column in the subpolar gyre from 1980 through 2013. Dark blue means low oxygen concentration, and red means high oxygen concentration. Hypoxia is marked by the black line, and below this line there is not enough oxygen for most organisms to survive. The red line shows the threshold below which it becomes dangerous for salmon, and the dotted line shows the area below which aragonite saturation state becomes unhealthy for theropods. If we now look at 100 meters depth, you can see that there are times when the oxygen is too low for the salmon, and their prey will also have issues due to ocean acidification. So to sum up, the Gulf of Alaska marine ecosystem is faced with multi-stressors that cause compound extreme events, and by a rapidly changing chemical habitat that requires fast acclimatization or adaptation. And we have just, and